I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. The traffic stop. A police officer in a patrol car pulling over a driver is the most common police-public interaction in America. And in many cases, it has gone horribly wrong. Traffic stops are also used in what is called pretextual manner. That is, they are a pretext for investigation the police wants to do. And the traffic stop is merely a way to create probable cause for searches which would otherwise be illegal. The police have used traffic stops to target minority drivers disproportionately. And Montgomery County Council member Will Juando, who often tells the story of being pulled over himself, has now proposed a bill to reduce the reasons police officers can use to make traffic stops in the belief that reducing them will make us all safer. The County Council has referred his proposal to the Maryland Attorney General for an opinion because traffic code is a state matter. And changing what Montgomery County Police enforces and what it doesn't enforce could very well require change in state law itself. While the county awaits the Maryland Attorney General's opinion, I talked with Councilmember Juando, who has announced a bid for Maryland's open seat in the United States Senate, the one left by the retirement of longtime Senator Ben Cardin. I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society moving precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from the one and only Seth Keibel, a longtime Baltimore area local musician and one of the earliest supporters of I Hate Politics podcast. The songs used in this episode are from his compositions from the album Clown with a Stick. Harry Appleman on piano, Jeff Reed on double bass, Joey Antico on drums, and Seth Keibel himself on the clarinet. Last week's episode looked at the new rent law just passed by Montgomery County, and we got this voice letter from a listener, which I thought I'd share.
Hi, Sunil. This is Scott Schneider, a listener of the podcast, and I'm with Progressive Neighbors. I appreciated your podcast today about rent stabilization bill that just passed, and having Mike English on, who seems very knowledgeable about the subject. The one thing that confused me is you specifically asked him about the difference between rent control and rent stabilization, and the bill that was passed by the county council was about rent stabilization, not rent control, and yet throughout the podcast, you constantly referred to it as rent control, which is significantly different. I hope you'll be more careful in the future about the words you choose because they make a difference. Thanks very much. I'm in Silver Spring, and I listen to your podcast regularly. Thank you.
The difference between rent control and rent stabilization is a big point of contention between proponents and opponents of the measure. The reason I used rent control interchangeably with rent stabilization in last week's episode is because, as someone who teaches political economy, I did not see significant conceptual difference. Control, to me, implies exactly what stabilization implies: flexibility rather than rigidity. Further, no matter how we cut it, a rent law is a price control mechanism and technically would be treated as a tax in any econometric equation. Still, Scott Snyder is correct. The political meaning of those terms are different, and the difference signifies important political salience. As a show that highlights the importance of politics, this is an excellent point to keep in mind. We love to hear from you when you like what we do on the show and when you think we have been remiss. It's easy to send us a voice letter, record on your phone, and email the file to producer@ihppod.org. In the news this week, a look forward at the 2024 elections in Maryland, starting with some background. The state divides its elections into 2-year alternating cycles, gubernatorial and presidential. 2022 was a gubernatorial year. Besides electing the governor, the state also elected a new attorney general, comptroller, county councils, county executives, and several other local positions. 2024 is going to be a presidential election year and will include the president and federal races, both House and Senate. The House of Representative races happen every 2 years, so they occur in both the gubernatorial and the presidential cycles. U.S. Senate elections happen every 6 years and usually coincide with presidential years, but not necessarily with gubernatorial years. School board races, which are also staggered like the Senate, occur on both presidential and gubernatorial cycles, with at least one at-large and 2 district seats up for election every 2 years. Usually, the gubernatorial year is more frenetic because there are lots more state and local seats in the fray. Presidential cycles tend to be less busy. Even when the presidential race is seen as critical, as between Trump and Biden in 2020, Maryland sees limited campaigning because it is believed to be solidly Democratic. In contrast, Virginia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania are seen as more national battleground states and get more intense campaigning. 2024 is likely to be different. First, expect the Senate race to be heated for the primary. Right now, it's a 3-way between Congressman David Trone, Prince George's County Executive Angela Alsobrooks, and Montgomery County Council member Will Joando. At a campaign event for Alsobrooks, Montgomery County D19 Senator Ben Cramer called the race a 2-way contest between his candidate, Alsobrooks, and the billionaire Congressman David Trone, who has put in $10 million of his own money into the race. The Democratic primary for the Senate should be intensely contested as a result. Trone's millions and stance as a moderate Democrat goes up against Alsobrooks' executive experience and her identity advantages. The Maryland delegation to the U.S. Congress is all male at this point. In a speech, Alsobrooks pointedly noted that the abortion issue is something best protected by a woman. But after the primary, the Senate race is expected to quiet down because of Maryland's voter profile and the absence of a serious Republican contender. Half the state's population lives in 3 Democratic strongholds of Montgomery County, Prince George's County, and the city of Baltimore. And voters from these jurisdictions can all but ensure anyone coming out of the Democratic primary will win the general election. There was some talk of former Governor Larry Hogan, a Republican, running for the Senate seat, but he has declined. If this changes, the U.S. Senate race in Maryland is likely to heat up quite a bit more. A serious Republican challenger would also change the Democratic primary and push toward the middle rather than pull to the left politically. But absent a serious Republican contender, and there doesn't seem to be one likely at this point, the real action on the Senate race should end after the primary. The fight for Maryland's Congressional District 6, which David Trone vacated to run for the Senate, however, is likely to go down to the wire. Maryland's 6th district is not considered to be a safe Democratic district. A court-directed redistricting effort put MD6 into greater equipoise. The 6th district includes up-county Montgomery, all of Frederick, Washington, Allegheny, and Garrett counties in western Maryland. Washington, Allegheny, and Garrett are conservative, and swaths of Frederick remain so while its urban areas have become Democratic. David Trone prevailed in 2022 in part due to his millions and his image as a moderate Democrat. Those vying to replace Trone do not have his millions or the profile to lock the seat down. Heath Barnes, mayor of Woodsboro, a scenic small town at the Appalachian foothills in Frederick County, told Maryland Matters that he expects 10 to 12 candidates in the Democratic primary and a similar number on the Republican side. He himself is planning to join the race for the GOP. On the Democratic side, Delegate Leslie Lopez from State District 39 in Montgomery County, which nests in MD6, and Joe Vogel, the Gen Z first-term Maryland delegate from State District 17, which includes Rockville, are the leading contenders. Hagerstown Mayor Takesha Martinez, Mia Mason, a trans-military veteran, and 3 others have also filed. Joel Rubin, a resident of Chevy Chase, which is not physically a part of MD6, said he's going to run. According to Maryland Matters, Lily Chi, delegate from Maryland District 15, is thinking about it. Brian Feldman, D15, state senator, is considering, and April Delaney, the wife of former congressman and one-time presidential candidate John Delaney, is mulling. Montgomery County Council member Lori Ann Sales is in the mix, as is Krish Vignaraja, who ran for governor in 2018. One name mentioned repeatedly but who has not publicly spoken about her interest is former Frederick County Executive Jan Gardner, who, if she decided to run, would immediately become the front runner. On the GOP side, apart from Barnes, the Woodsboro mayor, former governor candidate Dan Cox may or may not be running. Maryland Matters reported that a Cox aide had filed papers, but Cox himself was undecided on the issue. Who done it? We don't know. Also considering is state delegate from Allegheny County, Republican Jason Buckle, who is the House Minority Leader in the Maryland State House. Former state delegate Neil Parrott, who has challenged Trone in 2 elections, and former delegate Brenda Thiem are also in the mix. Tom Royals, a military veteran, and 3 others have also announced. The last reason the 2024 elections might be different is because of the controversy now surrounding school boards. In Montgomery County, for example, a religious parents movement has organized to secure an opt-out for their children from LGBTQ plus curriculum. This is really another version of the national anti-book movement started on the right by Christian groups such as Moms for Liberty that has become prominent in states like Virginia and Florida. Carroll County, a very conservative jurisdiction in Maryland, has already passed steps to curtail LGBTQ plus rights, including a ban on pride flags on school property. In Montgomery, the movement is a test for whether it can take root in an overwhelmingly democratic jurisdiction. Conservative Muslims and Ethiopian Orthodox churches have mobilized hundreds to protest the books in front of the County Board of Education. Whether or not these protests succeed will determine whether the anti-LGBTQ books movement spreads in predominantly Democratic strongholds. Meanwhile, expect considerable upheaval in front of school boards. I'll be back with Montgomery County Council member Will Juando to talk about his traffic stops bill. You're listening to I Hate Politics. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. Will Juando, welcome back to I Hate Politics.
Thank you.
You have a bill in the County Council now called the STEP Act, which is the Safety and Traffic Equity in Policing Act. What is the problem you're trying to solve with it?
Well, it's pretty aptly named. So it's to do 2 things. It's to focus our law enforcement activities on the most urgent traffic safety needs. You know, in any given year, we have about double the number of traffic and pedestrian fatalities that we do murders. And it's an urgent matter. And most of those, the vast majority, are due to speeding, driving impaired, drunk driving, reckless driving, running stoplights and stop signs, really serious moving violations and traffic safety issues. They're not due to the things that the STEP Act deals with, which is to solve another problem of, one, focusing our police on those really urgent traffic safety needs that are producing fatalities and injuries, but get them away and out of the business of low-level traffic enforcement, which we know from the OLO, Office of Legislative Oversight report, disproportionately happens for communities of color, disproportionately Black residents who are pulled over for things like having a air freshener in the rearview mirror, an expired tag, a tail light that's out, tinted windows, etc. This would direct our police not to pull people over solely for those violations. The bill accomplishes 2 things. It will focus our police on things that are an urgent matter and are producing fatalities and injuries right now. And there's too much of it happening, too much speeding, too much distracted driving, too many drunk driving and reckless drivers. And it will help solve what is a serious equity issue for disproportionality in policing and traffic stops, which is a primary way that people interact with police. that's disproportionately happening for communities of color, that doesn't produce trust, and then can have, unfortunately, fatal outcomes, but it certainly erodes the community police trust relationship that we need to work.
Just to clarify, the STEP Act itself looks at the second part of the problem, which is to reduce the number of traffic stops for non-moving violations that you were just talking about, for example, taillights or air freshener kinds of things. I didn't read any language that reprioritizes the police force on the first set of, more important things.
Yes and no, in that, yes, this just deals with saying don't pull people over as a primary offense for these things. But I think inherent in that, if you're not doing that, you're going to be spending your time doing other things. There's other traffic policies, direction from the executive, other bills that I'm a co-sponsor of to encourage more enforcement of these other traffic safety issues.
What bills are those?
There's a bill that Councilmember Glass introduced that advocates asked us to introduce around traffic safety, putting more cameras up and things like that. I forget the name of the bill right now.
So it's the Safe Streets bill, and that bill requires the county executive to come with a traffic enforcement camera plan. That is the extent of that, right? As of now.
Yeah, correct. And the county executive has already directed in the police department has started to, when they consolidated traffic enforcement, to focus on dangerous activities like speeding, reckless driving, impaired driving, and the like.
50% of the stops have to do with moving violations. This bill does not address those. Take them out, right? And then there is the rest, of which, over 30% are driver's licenses and title and tags.
But my bill addresses title and tags, so you can't just throw that 30% out.
I'm not throwing it out. I'm just asking you for how that would operate then.
Sure. Yeah. So again, you're correct in that this doesn't touch moving violations in any way. But if you look at nationally, Black and Latino drivers are disproportionately stopped and searched for low-level traffic offenses. In Montgomery County, as the report says, while overall traffic stops went down in the last 4 years, the disparities in stops either expanded, either persisted, stayed the same, or worsened. Right. Black drivers accounted for 30% of stops, despite being 18% of the population. You have a disparity with Latino drivers too. White drivers were underrepresented. They created a disparity score of like what kind of stops have the widest disparities. And some of them were in these low level of traffic offenses, tag and title, expired registration, obstructed window, winded tinting, tail light out. Even if you just take it, say 50% are off the table, there's some universe of traffic stops for these offenses that are happening in a disproportionate way and that don't produce safety, right? Like there's no data to support that pulling someone over for a windshield violation produces any additional roadway safety. And in fact, there's studies that show the opposite.
I can see how your bill will reduce the number of traffic stops. How does the bill address the racial disparity part? Because the numbers have dropped from 2018 to 2022. The number of traffic stops are less than
absolutely.
half.
If you can't pull over as a primary offense for the things that have the highest racial disparity, which is what this bill would prohibit, that would absolutely reduce racial disparities. What I would hope to see is that stops for truly safety issues like speeding and reckless driving would go up, and stops for things that do not produce safety and that have the highest racial disparities would go down.
Okay.
The disparities for speeding and everything are not as bad. They're not. So I want those to continue.
But we have evidence of traffic stops in Montgomery County between 2018 and 2022.
Right.
And that evidence shows that the number of stops have declined precipitously. Right. And they have declined in the moving violations category, and they have declined in the tinted window, tail light category. All of the stops are dramatically down. And yet we see a worsening, as you pointed out, of the racial disparity. The racial disparity seems to be stubborn in a way that it's hard to sort of understand. And then, of course, the question is, how does your bill address that stubbornness?
Yeah. Right now, our police officers, when you pull you over for any reason, a moving violation or whatever, because often people get multiple tickets. And the study also showed that Black and brown drivers are much more likely to get multiple citations, 4, 5, 6 citations, more likely than other drivers. And so right now, we don't know when our police officers pull you over and you get a ticket for example, for an obstructed window. We don't know whether they pulled you over for the obstructed window or whether they pulled you over for speeding or for running a stoplight or what the primary thing was. It doesn't say. Right. The system, they're not tracking that and say you have to track that and report what the primary reason for the stop is.
Do you know if the Montgomery County Police records every stop, even if they don't issue any?
That's an issue. Supposedly, the county executive has given guidance that should change. They're supposed to be doing that already. But that has not been happening. There are some.
So how is it the case that the county executive issues something and y'all want something and the police, doesn't have to do it?
Yeah, that's a problem. I mean, look.
What is that problem?
I think it's just not prioritizing it. And it's a separation of powers issue. Like we pass laws, the county executive.
But where is the separation of powers? The police is an executive agency.
Yeah, well, the executive has to hold their leadership to account.
So you're saying that the county executive is not holding them to account?
In certain areas, I think it's not been as good as it should be. And that's true of many departments, right? But in this area, I think it's not been great. For example, we passed the use of force law a couple of years ago that I authored that required separate use of force guidance to be issued for vulnerable populations, elderly, people with disabilities, pregnant women, et cetera. To have a separate guidance for those folks. They still haven't done it. And that's almost 3 years.
When a police department opposes a legislative body like that, what recourse do you really have?
Oh, well, I think one is you could always, the kind of nuclear option would be you would take them to court. Yeah,
an ordinary citizen without the resources that you have at hand.
Yeah,
as an elected official.
I'm starting.
That's a whole different.
Yeah. I'm giving you one of many things. The other things we can do, we have oversight. We have the budget strings. We could theoretically say, well, if you're not going to do what we say, we're not going to give you money for X, Y, and Z.
But apparently they haven't been doing it for 3 years. They don't have to, according to your statement.
They take a step here and a step there. Or they bring an excuse or this and that. I just think, look, ultimately, the executive implements the laws. Our job is to conduct oversight and to do the budget and to pass laws.
How do you conduct it effectively enough so that you get what you wanted, what you set out to do? Well, with the use of force is a great example you brought up, right? Is with the use of force, you pass this law and nothing's been done. And what oversight tools are really in your hands, I'm asking, that you can force the case?
I don't think nothing's been done. They did write a new use of force policy. They complied with parts of the law.
But you are not happy with how much has been done, right?
Oh, absolutely not.
So the legislative intent has not been fulfilled. Yeah. There is this huge gap, and there doesn't seem to be any systematic tools available in the hands of the council to be able to do it. And I ask because you are the STEP Act as well, right? Tries to do something that the police has opposed. I mean, you can do all the laws you want, but unless you can really make sure that they'll do it, there's pointless.
This is not unique to us, Sunil. You can go to any local or state government across this nation. There is always an inherent tension between what did the law say and are you actually doing it? Obviously, I work in a legislative body, so I have to get a majority of colleagues to agree with me on these things, of course. So that's always another wrinkle.
That's the underlying question here, really.
Right. Brown v. Board of Education desegregated the schools in 1954, but they didn't actually get segregated in most places till 10 years later. So the idea that there's never a lag between...
Your bill includes something called consent searches. Can you explain that, please?
Consent search is when you're pulled over or it could be on the street as well. When someone asks, but mostly in the context of being pulled over in a traffic setting, you're asked to, can I search your vehicle? Without the officer, because the officer under the Fourth Amendment can search a vehicle if they have probable cause or reasonable suspicion that a crime's been committed.
Right.
And that's a well-established standard. They don't need permission in those instances. Mm-hmm. If they feel like they've seen a gun or, they see contraband, whatever it is. But the consent search is often used in combination with a pretextual stop. So you stop, someone has a taillight out, you pull them over because you think you want to fish a little bit. They're asked if their car can be searched. They feel like they can't say no because they don't want to appear guilty. And then they sit on the curb for an hour while their car is searched. They're demoralized. They feel horrible about their community. And then they get sent on their way. And it's not only not produced safety and wasted time, it's made them feel bad and discriminated against about law enforcement. So it's a lose-lose situation. And this bill would prohibit those types of fishing.
The Montgomery County State's Attorney, John McCarthy, has testified in Annapolis, I believe, that over 80% of all illegal guns are recovered from cars.
I just need to stop you on that, because that is just, I don't know what that stat's pulled up from. So you just might want to verify that, because in Montgomery County last year, of the 40,000 traffic stops, there were like 200 guns or drugs, contraband, recovered 0.5% of the time. That
is his sworn testimony in front of the General Assembly. And I would assume that as state's attorney, he would have basis.
I would hope so.
Yeah. Basis in fact to make that argument. Let's talk about the other part of it, which is driver's licenses, title and tags that are a significant over 30%, I believe, of all stops are in that category. Now, we've had a problem in the Washington, D.C. region, not just in Montgomery County, with fake tags. How do you address that problem, even as you're trying to reduce the number of stops themselves?
There will still be enforcement as a secondary offense for tag and title and licensure. In Virginia, which has a statewide policy like this, you can only be expired 4 months or less. The other is automated enforcement. Our current Montgomery County Traffic Department, DOT, has the ability to, on the devices they use to issue tickets, to still issue tickets for registration violations. So, for example, if someone is parked, you could issue someone a citation for an expired registration.
But you don't even have to do that. Why did everybody's registration expires sometime? There's an address to it. Just send a ticket to the address.
Well, that was going to say that too. Like that, you could send it through the mail. I don't understand the logic of like how you're identifying a moving vehicle at 30, 40, 50, 60 miles an hour that has a fake tag. I just don't see that as an effective strategy. I think the most likely way to identify a fake tag is when the vehicle is not moving.
So in your view, there is no way to determine or have a suspicion of a fake tag on a moving vehicle?
Well, I'm not saying there's not a way. I just think that the idea
generally not a way because it's too fast.
Yeah, well, and there's no evidence to suggest that someone driving around with an expired or even a fake tag is creating a roadway safety issue. If someone is speeding or swerving or things that go along with people who are trying to evade criminal, they can be pulled over for any of those things. And then the tag can be investigated. The problem that I've heard most about is like people bringing like temporary tags from Texas that are fake, like reprinting. People aren't printing like hard license plates that are fake. That is not the problem. The temporary tag issue is an issue. And that's something that, for example, we could maybe put as an amendment. You can still pull someone over if you suspect that there's a fake temporary tag. I'm open to having that conversation.
If low income is a barrier to the renewal and that is leading to all these kinds of, issues, why not just give them the money to do it?
Well, I think supporting people with payments, I launched our guaranteed income program in the county. I'm a big fan of rental assistance. I think supporting people, low income people, to pay for things that cost a lot of money is always a good thing. I don't think it's a alone going to solve our issue here. That assumes that everyone that gets pulled over for these reasons is low income, which is not true. It also assumes that white residents or other residents that are higher income don't have registration issues. That's not true.
We started with the assumption that the racial disparity in these kinds of traffic stops are disproportionately black and brown. So now you're saying that others also get pulled over. And so therefore, it's not the case that, the others, of course, others get pulled over. But if you were to provide some fee support for.
I'm saying let's do that too. Sure. Yeah, I still don't think it eliminates the.
Do you think it's feasible? I mean, are you going to put in a bill?
Well, that would be probably a state level support.
If Montgomery County tomorrow wants a fund to support Montgomery County residents that are having difficulty renewing their driver's licenses, I'm not sure the state cares. Let's talk about the state and county interaction over this bill. Traffic enforcement is a state code issue. To what extent do you think your bill is preempting state law?
Well, I don't think it is. I think you mean to say it the other way, is that we are preempted by state law. But the state code gives us authority at the local level to have a limited authority on traffic law. You can read the packet that our council put out. They determined that this was within that scope. The county attorney determined that it wasn't. And since we had a conflicting opinion, we asked the attorney general.
So who determined yes when the county attorney?
Council attorney. The council attorney.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a difference between the council attorney and the county attorney on this.
Correct.
issue.
Correct. Okay. Bills are passed all the time, as you know, that people question whether they're constitutional, whether they're legal, et cetera, et cetera. A difference of opinions happen all the time. And we could still pass the bill regardless of what any attorney, including the attorney general, says about it. But obviously, I think it's prudent to get his and the office's opinion on it and factor that into whether and how we want to move forward.
If the attorney general opines that, state holds traffic enforcement as a primary legislating entity, do you think you'll find support on the council to move this bill forward?
Well, that's a lot of thinking forward and ifs, ands.
It's around the corner.
My goal here was to raise a very significant issue. If you haven't had a chance to look at the testimony, where someone who actually came to testify against the bill heard the very heartfelt testimony about people who had experienced these types of stops and changed their view in real time, which is something we almost never see. President Biden spoke about the talk that Black families have with their kids for 5 minutes at the State of the Union address this year.
There's no disagreement over the diagnosis of the issue. I mean, there is a problem. There is racial disparity in traffic stops. There's nobody disputing. My questions have really been about, whether your bill addresses the crux of it. That's what I'm really interested in, is in understanding how your bill actually solved the problem you identified, not the problem that somebody else identified.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah. There are some who say there isn't a problem. So we've started the conversation. Speaking of conversations, this conversation has started. The fact that I'm on your podcast talking about it is a part of it. I'm hoping it will spur further conversations about other ways to approach these issues, because I've yet to see a policy that is the only and the most complete way to solve every part of a complex issue, which this is. I think this is part of it. I think this it could be an important tool to focus our police on the most urgent safety needs and reduce disparities, as it has been done in other places. We're not the only, including the state of Virginia and Fayetteville and Philadelphia and Oregon and other places. But I think there's other ideas that we could talk about. If this comes back as we're preempted, I could work with my colleagues in the state legislature to maybe introduce a version of this at the state level, like they did in Virginia and Oregon, or they could give us more authority, right, to do this. Another thing that we've talked about and I've talked with the county executive about, is getting authority on the parking enforcement issue to get DOT, non-law enforcement parking meter folks to enforce registration issues. I think that could be a part of it. We could explore doing more automated enforcement. The same things that take a camera when you run a light could also run your registration. You can mail a ticket out. I think there's ways to explore other types of things. People who work in county garages, could do more rotation on these issues. So I'm open to other solutions.
What link do you see between this bill and public safety, the public safety debate more generally?
We're in this national conversation of reimagining and refocusing what police spend their time doing.
Yes, we were. I think we should have it, but I think politically the conversation's fizzled out.
Well, I mean, I'm still having it. So I just think some things become in and out. We had to have a global outcry at a 10-minute murder of George Floyd that the whole world watched and people protested. And we still haven't passed a federal bill on policing. The George Floyd Justice and Policing Act still hasn't passed. It did spur a lot of activity at the state and local level. I was proud to author several bills that passed unanimously around use of force and independent investigations.
But you passed those bills. They haven't come to fruition in the sense that you pointed out yourself that you passed a bill and they're not doing it. So,
well, I didn't say it didn't do anything. I said it hasn't done everything we'd like to see. You're not going to fix something that's been a foundational core problem of our country, like law enforcement disparities and discrimination. You're not going to fix that in 2 to 3 years. We've started the process. I think this is a part of that ongoing process of refocusing, reframing what our law enforcement spend their time doing. And I think we should have them focus on violent crime, on the most urgent roadway issues, not dealing with mental health, not dealing with homelessness, not dealing with low-level traffic enforcement. I think if we do that, we can keep people more safe and reduce disparities at the same time. This is a part of that larger conversation.
Will Juando, thank you for taking the time to explain the STEP Act. I know you're running for U.S. Senate. Good luck.
Thank you. Thank you, Sunil. I appreciate it.
You're listening to I Hate Politics. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. What lessons should we draw from my conversation with Montgomery County Council member Will Juando, who has proposed reducing traffic stops in an effort to improve public safety? First, policing reform is one of the toughest challenges in politics. It's harder than going to war and building a military. It's harder than building large infrastructure projects. The Purple Line may be delayed by 7 to 10 years, but consider the delay in police reform. It's harder than public health and, incredibly, zoning change. The thing that comes closest to it on the level of difficulty is actually education reform. And changing the police is even harder, I believe, than fixing schools. Why? Because in order to change schools or the police or other bureaucracies really, you have to convince the people within the institution to change. Since teachers and police officers have usually been there and done that and believe they know what works and what doesn't, they are unlikely to listen to outsiders even if they are county council members or executive authorities. There is recourse here, but it is really hard to exercise. What can Will Juando really do in response to Montgomery County Police slow walking a new use of force policy. His options are limited. He needs to convince a majority of the council to take dramatic steps, cut the police budget, or publicly censure the police chief or even the executive. But other county council members may not be willing. Indeed, even Joando might not want to go that far because that would cause unrest among the people themselves. Which brings us to the second part of why police reform is so hard. No society functions without a police. They perform a foundational task of governance. The job is generally hard, and it requires the exercise of discretionary power. A police officer can pull you over and let you go. Or you may find yourself sitting on the curb, hands tied behind you as the police search your car. They can let you go in an hour, but the damage in time and trauma is done. While the negative impact is disproportionately felt by minorities and the poor, a larger section of the population, many of whom are let go rather than held on the curb, feels protected. The police, when facing censure by politicians, nearly always appeal directly to the people. And the best intentions, let's just say, remain unenforced laws until the circumstances are right and the law is enforced. In some ways, school segregation remains in place today, 70 years after the Brown decision. Joando's STEP Act is a good example. As of now, it seems very likely that the Maryland Attorney General will say that state law on traffic enforcement will preempt county efforts to change the violations police have to enforce. Other county council members who were on the fence anyway will read the AG's opinion and have good reason not to move forward with the bill. The police department will cite the AG's ruling as holding, and the bill is likely to die. So, as Joando points out, he will have started a conversation. There is a mountain of literature on organization change, which is relevant here. Organizations change because of two reasons, and sometimes they need to be in concert. First, there is an exogenous shock. The George Floyd murder and the subsequent period of reckoning did indeed provide that external shock, and for 2 years we saw a flurry of activity around police reform. Second, it needs an internal leader to become the face of reform, like Al Gray in the post-Vietnam Marine Corps. But he only became commandant of the Corps in 1987, 12 years after the Vietnam War had ended. In the case of police reform, the political opportunity stemming from George Floyd's murder came and went. But we are still missing a reformer who is trusted by the politicians on top and by the rank and file under to be able to push through changes the organization has not wanted to see. That's all for this episode. You're listening to I Hate Politics. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. Music for this episode comes from Seth Keibel, a longtime Baltimore area musician. The songs used in this episode come from his compositions in the album Clown with a Stick. Harry Appleman on piano, Jeff Reed on double bass, Joey Antico on drums, and Seth Keibel on the clarinet. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihbpod.org. I hope you will subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.